I didn't plan to go inside the mine that morning. Snow was already falling hard, the kind that erases tracks in minutes and makes sound disappear. I was standing near the old logging road outside Black Hollow Ridge, pulling my hood tighter against the cold, when I noticed the iron frame half buried in ice. A mine entrance. Abandoned. Forgotten. The kind of place people warn you about, then stop talking altogether. My name is Elias Crowe. I'm 45 years old, tall, broad enough to carry my own weight, beard grown long because trimming it out here doesn't matter. I keep my hood up, always. Not because I'm hiding, because the cold doesn't forgive exposed skin. I don't show my full face. Never learned the value in that. The mine was supposed to be sealed after Jonah Hale, a miner from the early 1900s, disappeared during a late winter shift. That's what the county records say. No rescue, no body. Just a line drawn through his name and a warning sign that someone eventually stopped replacing. Inside, the air was wrong. Not rotten, not damp, just still, like it had been holding its breath longer than any man could. My headlamp caught rusted rails, collapsed timber, and something else, paper, a journal wedged between stones, wrapped in oilcloth that had no business surviving this long. The first page was neat. Careful handwriting, dates, counts of hours worked, supplies measured down to the last ration, a man trying to keep order. I kept reading as the snow thickened outside, sealing the entrance behind me without a sound. By the fourth entry, the handwriting changed. Lines leaned. Words crowded each other. Jonah wrote about silence pressing in, about thoughts looping when there's no one left to answer them. No monsters, no voices, just the mind turning inward with nothing to brace against. I felt the temperature drop, but it wasn't the cold that bothered me. It was the realization that Jonah didn't die from hunger or injury. He died after losing the only shelter that still mattered. Further in, past a partial collapse near North Vein Tunnel, I found him. What was left of him, curled close to the wall, helmet still on, lamp long dead. I didn't rush. I didn't speak. I gathered the remains, carried them out into the snow, and buried Jonah Hale beneath a pine overlooking the ridge. I marked the grave with stones and left the journal behind, because some warnings don't belong to the living alone. Before we go any further, let me be clear about what this channel is. This isn't a place for noise, jump scares, or exaggerated stories. What I share here comes from time spent alone, in cold places, where mistakes stay buried and lessons don't repeat themselves. If that's your kind of silence, you're in the right place. My name is Elias Crowe. I'm 45 years old. I live and move through remote terrain where winter decides the rules. I keep my hood up because the cold demands it, and I never show my full face because anonymity keeps the focus where it belongs, on the story, not the man telling it. What you're about to hear isn't fiction built for comfort. It's a record of observation, restraint, and consequence. Out here, wisdom isn't learned quickly, and it's rarely learned twice. Every place has a memory. Some of them are written down. Some are buried. If you value stories told without excess, without philosophy speeches, and without distraction, consider subscribing. This channel grows quietly, like snowfall overnight. No announcements, No alarms, just steady ground and honest accounts. Before we continue, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Country, region, or just the edge of nowhere. That's enough. Now that you're here, we can begin. Snow came down sideways that morning, thick and wet, swallowing the trail behind me as fast as I made it. Up on Black Hollow Ridge, weather doesn't warn. You notice it when it's already too late. My boots cut into fresh drifts, breath slow, controlled. I don't rush in places like this. Rushing is how you make mistakes. I noticed the mine by accident. A dark line in the white, half hidden beneath ice and dead brush. The iron supports were bent, corroded, barely standing. Someone had tried to seal it once, long ago. Time and winter had undone the work. That alone should have been reason enough to walk away. I stood there for a full minute, snow collecting on my shoulders, hood pulled low. The cold pressed in, familiar and sharp. I've learned to listen to that feeling, not fear, instinct. Still, something about the entrance felt unfinished, like a door left open on purpose. Inside, the temperature dropped fast. The kind of cold that settles into your bones without asking. My headlamp cut a narrow path through dust and darkness, revealing old rails, broken beams, and walls scarred by tools that hadn't touched stone in a century. Every step echoed longer than it should have. About 30 yards in, I saw the journal. It wasn't hidden. That's what bothered me. Propped against the rock, wrapped in oilcloth, placed where someone knew it would be seen. I picked it up carefully, like it might fall apart in my hands. It didn't. The first entry was dated February 3rd, 1907. The name Jonah Hale written cleanly at the top. Supplies listed. Hours logged. No emotion, just order. A man keeping control of what little he could. I respect that. Order matters when everything else is unstable. By the third page, the tone shifted. Sentences shortened. Margins filled. Jonah wrote about the silence growing heavier at night, about thoughts circling back on themselves. No panic, no drama, just observation. That was worse. He knew what was happening and couldn't stop it. I closed the journal and stood there in the dark, snow sealing the world outside. The mine wasn't empty. Not in the way people mean. Some places don't let go of men who lose themselves inside them. I took a breath, steadied my hands, and went deeper. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Not just sound, movement, pressure, time. My footsteps felt delayed, like the ground waited before answering them. Snowmelt dripped somewhere far off, each drop spaced so evenly it felt deliberate. I slowed my pace, letting my breathing set the rhythm. The tunnel narrowed near North Vein Passage. Beams warped and cracked, held together by rust and habit. My headlamps swept across the walls, catching old chalk marks and numbers scratched by men who trusted measurements more than luck. None of it had been touched in decades. Still, the air felt used. I stopped when I noticed the smell. Not rot, not damp. Something older. Dust that had been disturbed recently, though no tracks marked the floor. I knelt, ran a glove across the ground. Smooth. No footprints. Whatever had moved here hadn't left any. I opened Jonah Hale's journal again. The handwriting was tighter now, pressed hard into the paper. He wrote about losing track of days, about speaking out loud just to hear a voice answer back. Not another voice. his own. He underlined a sentence twice. Silence teaches you things you can't unlearn. Further in, my headlamp flickered once. Just once. I stopped immediately. Equipment doesn't fail without reason in cold like this. I checked the battery. Full. The light steadied, but the darkness beyond it felt closer than before. I reached a junction marked Carter's Split, where two tunnels diverged. One collapsed, the other open, untouched. Jonah had written about this place. He called it the point of choosing. No explanation, just that phrase, repeated in the margin like a reminder. I stood there longer than necessary. In places like this, hesitation can be as dangerous as haste. Still, something told me Jonah hadn't gone the wrong way by accident. I adjusted my grip on the journal and stepped into the open tunnel. Behind me, the air shifted. Not a sound, not movement, just the sense of being observed without eyes. I didn't turn around. I kept walking, deeper into the mine, where Jonah's words ended and something else began. The tunnel beyond Carter's Split sloped downward, slow at first, then steeper, forcing me to lean into each step. The air grew heavier, carrying a faint metallic taste. My headlamp showed fewer tool marks here. This section had been rushed. Men don't rush without reason. The journal grew harder to read as I walked. Jonah's handwriting thinned, letters stretched and uneven, as if he'd started conserving space or strength. He stopped marking dates. Time had lost its usefulness to him. He wrote instead about counting breaths, about staying awake because sleep felt like surrender. I passed a section where the wall had caved inward, stones frozen mid-fall like they'd decided not to finish the job. I touched one just to be sure. Solid. Real. Still, the silence pressed close, thick enough to feel on my skin. Jonah mentioned this place. He called it the low reach. Said the ceiling forced him to crawl. Said the dark there felt intentional. He wrote that the mine didn't collapse to trap him. It narrowed to study him. I didn't agree, but I understood why he thought that way. I crouched and moved forward, pack-scraping stone. My breath echoed back too fast. That's when I noticed the marks, not from tools. Fingers, dragged through dust along the wall, low and uneven. Human, desperate. I followed them without thinking. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. My headlamp revealed scattered equipment, a broken canteen, and scraps of fabric frozen stiff. I knew before I saw the helmet. It rested near the far wall, cracked clean down the side. Jonah Hale lay a few feet beyond it, or what remained. Curled toward the stone, knees drawn in, hands tucked close like he'd been trying to stay warm. No sign of panic, no struggle, just stillness. I knelt there for a long time. The journal slipped from my grip and fell open to the last entry. One line, written so faint it almost disappeared into the page. A man without order has nowhere left to stand. I closed the book and sat with him in the dark, letting the silence finish what it had started. I didn't move Jonah Hale right away. In places like this, haste feels like disrespect. I shut off my headlamp and let the darkness settle fully, the kind that removes distance and scale. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was complete. This was where Jonah's strength ended and where mine was being tested. When I turned the light back on, I studied the chamber carefully. The way Jonah had positioned himself wasn't random. His back against stone, knees drawn in, hands steady, not clenched. He hadn't fought the end. He had chosen how to meet it. That realization changed the weight of the room. The journal confirmed it. The final pages weren't frantic. They were precise. Jonah wrote about order as if it were shelter, about how a man can survive hunger, cold, even fear, if his thoughts remain aligned. But isolation without discipline corrodes faster than any hardship. He had known the rule too late. I gathered his remains slowly, wrapping them in my spare canvas. Every movement deliberate. The cold bit into my fingers, but I didn't rush. Carrying another man's end demands steadiness. This wasn't recovery. It was responsibility. The climb back through the low reach felt longer. The tunnel pressed closer than before, forcing patience. My breath stayed even. Jonah's words stayed with me. He hadn't been defeated by the mine. He had been worn down by unguarded thoughts, repeated too often in silence. At Carter's split, I stopped again. This time, there was no hesitation. The mine no longer felt curious. It felt finished. Whatever presence I'd sensed earlier was gone. Not driven away, released. Outside, snow fell heavier, wind cutting across Black Hollow Ridge. I carried Jonah uphill to a stand of pine overlooking the valley. The ground was hard, but manageable. I worked until my arms burned, then worked some more. I laid him to rest beneath the trees, marked the grave with stacked stones, and stood back. No words, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. The lesson was clear now. Strength of body buys time. Strength of mind decides how that time ends. I stayed by the grave longer than I needed to. Snow settled on the stones, softening their edges, already working to erase my effort. Out here, nothing stays marked for long. That doesn't make the act meaningless. It makes it honest. I placed Jonah Hale's journal at the base of the pine, sealed again in oilcloth. I didn't take it with me. Some records belong to the place where they were written. Carrying it farther would have turned it into a story. Leaving it kept it a warning. As I packed my gear, I noticed how quiet the ridge had become. The kind of quiet that follows resolution. No shifting air, no pressure at my back. Whatever tension had lived in the mine ended with Jonah's name spoken once, out loud, in the open. The walk back down Black Hollow Ridge was slow. Snow reached my knees in places, forcing steady movement. My body was tired, but my thoughts were clean. That mattered more. Out here, clarity is warmth. I thought about how Jonah had entered that mine with tools and experience, but without rules for his own mind. He trusted strength and routine, but not discipline of thought. When isolation stripped everything else away, he had nothing left to stand on. Most men think survival is about force, about pushing forward no matter what. That works until it doesn't. Endurance without direction becomes erosion. You don't notice it happening. You only notice when there's nothing solid left inside. I reached the tree line as dusk settled in, sky turning the color of iron. I didn't look back. The ridge didn't need witnesses anymore. It had been answered. I kept my hood up and my face hidden as always. moving on through the snow. Some lessons are meant to be carried forward, not explained. Jonah Hale stayed behind. The order he lacked didn't. The story ends on Black Hollow Ridge, but the lesson doesn't stay there. Jonah Hale wasn't undone by darkness, hunger, or cold. He was undone by time spent alone without structure. Out there, strength fades, tools fail, and the body negotiates. The mind does not. It either holds its ground or slowly gives it up. What you allow to repeat inside your head becomes the place you live in when everything else is taken away. If you're still here, take a moment before you leave. Subscribe to the channel if you value stories told without noise. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. City, forest, coastline, or somewhere in between. I don't share these accounts to entertain. I share them so the next man who finds himself alone in the cold understands this one thing. Your last shelter is order. Guard it, or the silence will claim it for you.